Please comment where you are watching in the world. Please become a channel member to support us, and share your dating horror stories to us via our subreddit in the description. Now let's dive in. Back in 2003, I recently moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I decided I was going to sign up for Match.com and try online dating for the first time. Started messaging a few girls and eventually made a connection and set up a date. We decided to meet at P.F. Chang's. We had discussed that it was going to be casual, so of course she showed up in an evening gown, first flag. She was super gorgeous and looked great in the gown, but also looked completely out of place. Fight or flight kicked in, but she was hot, so I decided to stay and fight. She stood next to me at the bar and ordered 2 glasses of wine. One she immediately downed, the second she took a sip and turned to me and said, "Hi." Second flag, kind of. We had some awkward small talk, and I mentioned her evening gown. She told me she collects them, and decided to wear one tonight to dazzle me. Third flag, but I am staying in this. We were seated at a table, and as the server walked up, she ordered a bottle of wine. Fourth flag, okay, she likes wine, and she's hot, I'm still in it. We have more awkward small talk and eventually order food, and by the time I have finished my first beer that I had ordered while back at the bar, she already finished the bottle of wine, and orders another. Fifth flag, and now I am planning my escape plan. I stand and ask if she knows where the restrooms are, and as she is pointing in a direction behind me, I turn to look, and I feel a stabbing pain in my right cheek, which literally makes me flinch in pain. I grab my ass as I turn to see WTF just bit me, and she is giggling her ass off. Also, she is holding a 5-inch long pin, which she just used to stab my ass. Sixth flag, and I am done. Fuck this, don't stick your dick in crazy. I walk to the bathroom and go in one of the stalls, drop my pants and do a hand sweep of my right cheek, and my hand comes back bloody. FML. I use toilet paper and apply pressure to eventually stop the bleeding. I zip up and go stare at myself in the mirror as I wash my hands and have a Pulp Fiction moment, where I say to myself in the mirror, "Okay, go back out there, tell her this evening is over and that you are going home. Don't fucking ever do this online dating shit no more." So I walk out and find the server. I pay the bill and close the check. I tell the server to hold off serving anything until I am finished talking with my date, and I am walking to the door. She agrees. As I walk up to the table, I am noticing people are giving me the hairy eyeball and realize that my date is silently sobbing at the table. For some reason I am the asshole in this situation. Maybe they didn't see the assault on my ass, but maybe only the death glare I gave her as I held my ass cheek. I sat down and asked why is she crying. She said that she fucked up by drinking so much wine, and she thought she was being cute and funny poking me with the hat pin. She said it's an antique, and she collects those too. I told her that I was pretty shocked when she stabbed me with it, and that my ass was bleeding where she stabbed me. I told her that this evening got off on the wrong foot, and that I had already paid the bill, and that we should try it again another time, not ever. With that, she snapped out of her sobbing quietly and began yelling at me. "Wait, you're leaving? You can't leave me." I said, "Look, the evening has taken a bad turn, and I just want to go." She stood up and yelled, "No one leaves me, I leave them," and started marching to the door of the restaurant, forgetting that there were 3 steps she had to walk down towards the entrance of the restaurant. She took a tumble down the stairs, purse flying, pashmina wrapped around her foot, and landed hard on the bottom step. As I stood there, I was like, WTF, could this get any fucking worse? And it did. She started crying and holding her ankle. Servers and manager came running, as well as an off-duty paramedic. They started working on her there, icing and elevating her left leg, because she might have broken her ankle. The paramedic called 911, and within minutes the ambulance was there. They got her on the gurney, and were wheeling her out the door of P.F. Chang's to the ambulance. Throughout this whole scene, I never said a word. I was just an observer hoping this was all a shitty dream, and hoping that as the ambulance doors closed, I could just walk to my car unnoticed. Nope, not so lucky. She started screaming for her boyfriend, the guy she had been on a date with. Everyone looked at me. I started to say, "Wait, hold on. I'm not her boyfriend," when I was cut off by the paramedic, and he said, "They are taking her to Presbyterian Medical Center, follow them." I got in my car and was taking my time, but the ambulance was fucking waiting for me. I pulled up behind them and flashed my lights, and they took off. Throughout the drive to the hospital, I was thinking of just going home, but I did feel some responsibility to at least see this nightmare through to the end. It was a light night at the ER, and she was getting the full treatment from everyone because she was gorgeous and dressed in an evening gown. She had x-rays which showed no broken bones, so they put her in an air cast and crutches. When she was released, I was there to take her home. She wasn't going to be able to drive her car, which was still at the restaurant. We drove silently for the most part, except when she had to tell me where to turn. We eventually pulled up to her house, and I had to help her out of the car and up to her front door, where she asked me to come in. I said the evening was eventful, but I have to go. She then said, "Well, the evening doesn't have to be a complete disaster. Come on in, sit back on the couch, and let me take care of you with my mouth." I literally ran off that porch laughing hysterically like Curly from the Three Stooges until I got in my car and hauled ass out of there. I deleted my account and never used Match.com again. Worst date ever. Back when I was around 17 to 18, I would go out to parties with my friend at night. It was my best friend at the time, Ivan, and his cousin Caesar, that would invite me out that fateful night. I had been talking to a friend of Ivan on Facebook about meeting each other, and since I really hadn't had much experiences with girls, I thought it was now or never. This girl had a birthday party that day, and invited us all to join her. So I took a bath, got ready, and my friends pulled up for me on a small car named Otto's that was really popular in Mexico in early aughts. Since it was small, it was really good at saving gas and no too expensive, so the perfect car for a college student. I said bye to my mom and got in. We went to buy beer for the night and a pack of smokes for everyone. Back then I would smoke a lot. I still cringe about it, but it was a college thing, I suppose. My friend told us that he had been in contact with this girl on Facebook and that she accepted to come to the party with him tonight. We all were impressed and happy for him. We pulled to her house and parked near a park to wait for her. I remember a group of thugs walking around the park, but since they seemed our age, we weren't too bummed out. My friend called her to come out, and my friend Caesar stepped out for a smoke. I was sitting in the back not wanting to come out because of these guys outside. They seemed to be asking for trouble because they'd begun to argue about something really dumb with him. So my friend Ivan told me to step out just to have his back in case anything went down. I'm not particularly strong, but I am almost 6 feet tall, and with a winter coat, I tried my best to appear though enough for them to think twice. I lit a cigarette and pretended to be a tough mofo, looked at a guy and laughed. Somehow it worked and they left. We went to the party and had a great time. I made out all night the girl I was talking to and later even found out she had kissed pretty much every dude that was there before me, lol. Nevertheless, I was still grateful for the opportunity and said goodbye with a long kiss. As we headed back to the house of my friend's date, she seemed very quiet. I knew they had hit it off during the party, but now looked stiff and even scared. My bud and I were riding in the back to let them have the front to themselves, but she was just nervously looking at her phone. When we arrived, she wanted to get out, and my friend, trying to score points, said, "Wait, I'll walk you in." She did not like this and said, "Just go." We were a bit buzzed in the back and wanted to have a smoke, so we all stepped outside and watched them go to her door. I remember laughing about something with my friend when the mood suddenly became so dark. She started screaming, "Go now. Get out of here." A car pulled out nearly in front of us, and people with bats and blunt instruments got off so fast I barely remember how I got back into the back seat. The girl said something along the lines of "leave them alone," and held him while a bunch of dudes got out. My friend Ivan got into the driving seat and started the car. Thankfully it started right up without trouble, but a big bottle of liquor then hit the windshield, cracking the top corner. I saw some guys come from the right side of the car where we were standing and quickly went to the other side to let my friend have easy way in into the back right seat. As I turned the corner, I saw this massive looking guy come up to me and barely had time to close the door and pulled the lock down. Dude was punching my window. My other friend wasn't so lucky since he actually got hit in the head and had barely made it in the car. He couldn't even close the door because one guy was grabbing his leg. All of this happened in the span of 6 seconds. I acted all out of instinct, and thankfully we all got in, and my friend stepped in the gas while zigzagging in case they would shoot at us. We re-scared shitless and wonder what had happened. As we got back to our neighborhood, my friends were fuming. Both of them knew their way around the fight and could hold their own. I, on the other hand, am turning 30 next year and still have never been in a fight. Thankfully, I still had some cash left and told them we should go buy some illegal beer at midnight and tried my best to calm them down and convince them not to go back. My friend Caesar had actually woken a dude up in the middle of the night with a phone call, and the man was ready to show up and throw down. After a few beers and a lot of talking, I convinced them it was worth it, and to just let the night end. I got home, my parents never found out, and just fell asleep. The next few days my friend Ivan called me and told me that the girl's ex-boyfriend was actually a lead gang member, a gang known for beating the hell out of people and dropping them in water canals around the city. My heart dropped out of my chest. We had been seconds away from getting beat down and maybe killed by a bunch of thugs for a goddamn date. If it wasn't for our quick reaction, her backing them up a bit, and something outside this realm that wanted us to get away, we might not have made it. To this day, I still stay awake at nights thinking of how fast and out of nowhere situations like this can present themselves in your life. How many times have we avoided critical danger? All I can say is trust your gut and your instincts. In the end, it all happens so fast, it's all you have. I met this girl at a local fuel stop back in April 2000. She was wild, sexy, and loved rock and roll, so I decided to surprise her with front row tickets to Kiss as a first date. She was so excited. We talked on the phone for about a week. The anticipation was plain silly. She seemed completely normal, so these tickets were a chore to get. The only place that had any left was the old Ticket King scalper. I paid $300 for 2 tickets, front row, left of stage. It took everything I had in savings to get them. So I picked the gal up the night of the show, and she was a little tipsy. I thought, cool, I'll grab some beers at the show and catch up to her. Easy enough. We get to the show, her buzz was intensifying. Speech was slurred pretty bad, so I grabbed 2 32-ounce beers for myself and headed to our seats. By the time we got to our seats, 25 minutes or so had passed, and I could tell the situation was worsening. She didn't sit in the chair, she collapsed. Kind of like plopped. I looked at her. She laughed real loud and said, "My legs don't work good." I asked her how much she had drank, and she said about a pint of whiskey. That still didn't add up, so I asked her if she took any medicine. She said, "Nah, I'm fine. Give me 20 minutes to sober up." The opening act came out, played a few songs, and I noticed she was salivating profusely. I stood her up, said, "Let's get you to the bathroom," and that's when shit got nuts. She projectile vomited on about 5 people around us, including me, and kicked over my last beer onto some bundle of wires covered by some kind of rubber speed bump and slipped on it, landing in vomit. I got her up, making eye contact with the 19,000 people sitting behind me, and walked her to the bathroom. By the time we got there, she was in rough shape. Lots of dry heaving, more puke, and some salty language to people in her way. She bounded into the bathroom, and I went to wash myself up. Well, about 15 minutes went by, and a lady came rushing out of the bathroom and screamed, "Who's with this sick girl? She's choking." I rushed into the women's room, and here was OL Gal, white as a ghost and puking up the remaining contents of her stomach, laying on her side convulsing. I ran out and got a nearby security guard to call help. They loaded her on a gurney, and we went backstage to a med bay. Once we got in there, a nurse came in and asked us a load of questions, which my date refused to answer. Nurse went to get more help, and all of a sudden the quiet turned to this roar. It was 20,000 people screaming, then Detroit Rock City kicked off, and the whole building just shook. I then realized I was not going to see this concert. I might hear it, but I wouldn't see it. Then the medics came in. They hooked her up to a machine, checked her vitals, and asked again, "Have you had anything?" "This girl squelches, I love Valium." Guess what? She did. 30 minutes later, I was in the ER of a close-by hospital, meeting her parents, explaining to them I didn't give her any Valium. Just some beer and a joint. Didn't even know she liked pills. Turns out she loved pills. In fact, so much that she had been in 10 different hospitals for overdoses, mental instability, and depression. She'd tried to end herself several times and stabbed her ex-fiancé with a screwdriver once. Really nice people with the saddest look on their face. I walked to my car, drove home, and stared at the wall for 4 hours, clueless as to how I never saw any of that coming. Never heard from her again. Heard years later that she had died of an overdose. 290 milligrams. That's how much Valium they anticipated she took. In her purse was a blister pack of 10 milligrams Valiums. I delivered pizzas to a certain hotel quite regularly, and the cute girl I was at the front desk. I was acquainted with her before through a friend. Asked if I wanted to get a drink. I was very happy for the offer. I was a little heavy at the time, and was glad for some company. Turns out it was more of a vent session about her ex for 2 hours. I tried to intersperse something here or there or change the subject, but everything had to be about him. After she left, I felt a sigh of relief, and the bartender put a Jaeger bomb in front of me, and poured himself one, then just gave me the, "Who glad that's over" look. It was kinda awkward every time I'd go to the hotel for my job, and she'd ask to get a drink. I had to pretend to be sober. Edit. Just realized this isn't even close to my worst date. Strap in. A couple years before the story above took place, I had been seeing someone casually. We would normally meet up after each of us got off work, have some drinks and laughs, and go back to mine or her apartment. It was a good deal. We really enjoyed each other's company, and the physical chemistry was really strong. She left on a 6-week trip overseas, and we talked occasionally in that time. I started to miss having her around, and thought maybe I should be taking this more seriously. When she got back, we decided to go on our first proper date in the 4 months or so we'd been seeing each other. We go to the restaurant, and before the waiter even brings us our appetizer, she gets strangely hostile. I got a very direct and accusing, "How many people did you sleep with while I was away? Did you sleep with that register girl at your work?" It came out of left field for me, and the answer was no. I didn't know where me and her were at, but it kind of felt wrong to me. Conversation changed and became pleasant again. Then again, completely unprompted, she says, "My friends don't like you." All I could think to say is, "That's too bad, I like them." I'm starting to feel something's pretty wrong at this point. We went to Guardians of the Galaxy, and she's still being negative. That movie was stupid. I fell asleep during it. Let's go home and have a drink then. We're at the app pool, and again it's accusations about work girl. I'm tired at this point, so let's go inside. Argument somehow turns into kissing and more. Not so bad, right? We have sex, and I last like an embarrassingly short amount of time. It had been 6 weeks, okay? She was furious, and for once in the date it wasn't unfounded. We go back to the pool with drinks, and she's still grilling me about work girl. I finally realized she's projecting a guilty conscience, and I ask, "Did you sleep with somebody?" Her. I don't know how to answer that. Me. I don't care if you did, you're not my girlfriend. If you were, you wouldn't have done it. Warning, if you can be grossed out fairly easily, now is the time to stop reading. Her attitude improved after the initial shock. We go back in and start having sex again, but something wrong, very wrong. I can feel something rubbing against part of the head of my penis during strokes, until eventually it becomes painful. I stop and look down. Part of my head looks like someone took a light sander to it. Think like a scraped knee. She somehow blames me. I calm her down, reach in her cervix and press on the object there. She says she can't feel what I'm pressing on, and I tell her it's a foreign body, and she has to see an OB-GYN soon. The next morning I drive her back in complete silence for 20 minutes. The only thing I say was, "Please see an OB." I get a text a few hours later saying it was a week-old tampon, and they removed it. Spent the next 10 days letting my dick heal and putting antibiotic ointment on it. That was the worst date. This year I matched with a woman on Tinder. She worked in the same industry I'm in and am passionate about and has the position I want, so I felt that was a, hey, maybe this could eventually be long-term. We had great online chemistry, definitely my type of humor and looks, similar hobbies like same type of music and movies, etc. Soon we were texting each other all the time, and it's getting intense. It's starting to feel like I have a GF. We haven't met yet, but it seems like we both really like each other and are both excited to finally meet. It had been around 5 days of texting. She lived 2.5-hour drive away, but I go to her city every couple weeks, so we scheduled I'd go up and pick her up from her back shift in the morning and just head to her place and go from there. I was welcome to stay for a few days at her place until I had to go back home. I'm thinking, yes, I haven't gotten laid in months, and now I'm going to get it all out of my system with this exciting new girl for days. This is awesome. I didn't have work for a few days, and I borrowed $20 to fill up my gas tank to get to her because I was super broke. Payday was just a couple days away, so whatever. So, I woke up at 4:30 a.m. and drove 2.5 hours to meet here for 7 a.m. at her work. We planned to both nap and cuddle until the afternoon, then get up to whatever. I pick her up. I'm super excited to meet her finally, and I say, "Hey." I smile and reach over to hug and kiss her. She goes, "Whoa, you move fast," and stops the kiss. I feel, what? Oh shit, did a scroop? She tells me she hasn't been feeling well, and we should go to the hospital. She wants to go to the clinic and get checked out. Okay, well, I guess I'm glad you stopped me then. Okay, I understand that sucks, but it's okay. Thank you actually. Okay, cool, let's go to the clinic. I'm bummed a bunch, but at least maybe it's just bad luck and timing if she just got a cold or the flu. So we're driving and talking, and through the conversation I'm more and more, what the fuck is going on here? Long story short, take her to the clinic, she tests positive for chlamydia, then explains to me she wasn't taking her medications recently and fucked a bunch of different guys. One of the guys was a homeless gay. By man who has sex for money so he can bang drugs and needles. She didn't know this apparently. She learned it by going through his phone and snooping around when he was in the washroom. They fucked without condoms, of course. I asked her when she found out about this, about 3 days ago. She didn't tell me because she liked me and didn't want to scare me off. The entire time all of this was unfolding, I kept my cool, stayed positive, and play everything off as oh well. When we get back to her place, she introduces me to her pets. She gets naked and tries to seduce me, and I'm like, yeah, you're hot shit, but yawning I am so tired, because I genuinely was. Do you want to just cuddle for a while? I really need to sleep. Cuddle up with my boxers and shorts on. She falls asleep. I slink out of the bed, gather all of my shit quietly, creep quietly out of her apartment, into my car, drive away. And once I was a few blocks away, I finally felt safe to start calling and texting my friends to please help me. I met up with one of my best friends for lunch on him. He put some gas in my car, laughed his fucking ass off at me and my story, and gave me $20 to help out. I crashed at my other friend's place for several days until I got paid and could finally get the hell out of there. Jake was a guy I knew all my life. As a kid, he didn't have a lot of friends, and he got made fun of for having FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome. When we were younger, I did my best to be his friend, and this continued until we were around 15 years old. Around that time, he started being a bit annoying. He would ask me out on dates constantly, but at the time I had a lot going on and wasn't interested in dating anybody. However, he kept it up no matter what I said. Years passed, and he was picked on more and more, but it got harder to feel bad and even harder to befriend him because he constantly asked for dates. It wasn't just me at this point, however. He did this to many other girls. One girl who moved here, he dated on and off for a month before she moved away. While they were together, I have never seen a shittier boyfriend in my life. In art class, he purposely poured paint on her multiple times and then said, oh, she had paint on herself anyway. He kept asking her to get pregnant for him, but she didn't want to because they were 16 and 17 at the time. Eventually, she gave in and told him in school that she would have his baby. He laughed, stood up and screamed, no, you're too ugly, we're breaking up. She cried and went to the office. After the girlfriend moved away, they lost contact for a long time, so he went after other girls. He was really creepy to all of them. They were all far below his age, ranging from 12 to 14 when he was 18, 19. He would constantly post on Facebook about his undying love for these girls that he had just met and hung out with for one day. He would even update his relationship status without telling them first. In 12th grade, he would sit with me every day on the bus, even though it wasn't his assigned seat. When I moved away for university, he kept video calling me on Facebook and messaging me relentlessly asking about school, which was okay, and of course, relationships. I had to lie a few times, which he believed, and strangely, when I got involved with somebody, he would not believe me. He blamed his behavior with me and other girls on his FAS. The real problem began back in December. High school was over, and I had gone to a university out of town, so I had been moved away for a few months. It was Christmas break, which meant I would be home for 2 weeks. Back then, I had promised to go on a few dates with somebody when I returned to school. When I got home for break, Jake messaged me. He said, hey, wanna go for a ride? And I told him I had to eat lunch first, but yes. I decided to give him a chance to be my friend again. He ignored me and came to my house anyway. I finished lunch fast, and soon I was in his car. Everything was normal, and we were talking like nothing had ever happened. Next thing you know, I was in a restaurant with him. I didn't have my wallet, but he said he would pay. He didn't tell me we would be eating out. When it came time to pay, he made a big scene, pretending not to have his wallet. Soon, my mother came in to get something for herself, and he fucking made her pay. When we got to the car, he told me he had his wallet all along. When we got to the car, it really went downhill. He started asking if I have a boyfriend. I told him I did. He wasn't my boyfriend yet, but I did promise to date him, and he later became my boyfriend. Then he started asking if we had had sex, and then if we did anal or oral, and then did you let him put his dick inside you? It was so uncomfortable. I told him no at first, and he didn't believe me. I told him I had sex with him, which was true, and he instantly erupted in laughter. Next, we drive to a store where he buys me chips and Coke, and then buys alcohol and lottery tickets. He starts swearing at the cashier and telling them he's not a Christian anymore. We leave, and then the major crazy came out. "Let's listen to music," he says, and he blasts Anaconda as loudly as it can go. He starts speeding a bit, and I tell him to stop. He says, "You should go out with me." I tell him, "I can't. I already love someone. I have a boyfriend." He says, "Break up with him for me. Or when you break up, go out with me." He stops the car and starts asking what my boyfriend's name is, and looks him up on Facebook. I should have gotten out of the car. He starts the car up and turns the music up louder. He is swerving all over the road, speeding like a maniac, and begging me to go out with him. I was nearly in tears asking him to stop it, and that I would never date him. We went to his house. He flicked rubber bands at his dog. He Skyped his high school girlfriend asking her to fuck him, and lied to his mother's face about who was on Skype. He also updated their relationship status without her permission. When I got home, I was going to tell my boyfriend, but he had things to tell me. Jake has messaged him, pretending to be me on his Facebook. He told my boyfriend I was dumping him. I was dating Jake now. Then he started sending pictures of us in high school as proof. My boyfriend saw through this. He knew I did not spell so badly as him. And also Jake started randomly telling my boyfriend to fuck off and saying his dad's a cop. His dad is not a cop. Months later, my boyfriend and I are happy together and in a serious relationship. I had been away from home for nearly a year. When I went back home, I learned that Jake has flipped his car and got out fine. He thanks the hand of God for getting him out alive. My mother tells me I can't get in cars with him again. Thank you. I return back to school for the end of the semester, and my boyfriend and I are more serious than ever. One day we are talking about Jake and go on his Facebook. He has been after multiple girls and being a creepy asshole to them all. I came back home 2 weeks ago for summer. Jake messaged me the other day asking, "You got a BF?" I tell him yes. He won't believe me and I tell him off. I say, "Give it up for God's sakes. You know I have a boyfriend. We are serious and I will never date you." Not after the car ride. Sorry, but it's true. After this, I block him and delete his multiple accounts. The other day we had to be in the same room together, and he didn't even look at me. Alright, here is another one from my books, a bit of backstory on it. My ex-girlfriend had a roommate I will name Lilu. Lilu always seemed a little off, but never in a threatening way. She had a rough upbringing with strict parents considering she was trans. She did suffer from depression, but nothing else to my knowledge. I would always talk and hang out with her when my girlfriend was gone, because we were both social rejects, and I know how shitty it is to be alone. So fast forward a few years later after me and said ex had long split up, I was living with my long-term boyfriend and hadn't heard from Lilu in forever. I assumed she was okay and healthy. One day as I went to get the mail, I got a letter from someone. No name on the envelope, it was kind of bulky. So I was curious, as I am a hermit with severe social anxiety and don't really talk to people. Ecstatically, I tear open the letter and realize it is from Lilu. It consisted of about 5 pages, 3 explaining that she had to go into a psych ward for a while because she was severely depressed and tried to kill herself. Okay, first red flag, but I am so naive to that stuff I really just felt bad. And another page of poems which didn't surprise me because she always wrote beautiful poetry, and a $2 Canadian bill which again didn't surprise me. She always gave cool old stuff to close friends. It was actually really nice to hear from her. I searched her up on Facebook and thanked her for the letters, and we started talking more about this and that, life things mostly. When she asked to start hanging out like old times, I agreed, because she was never someone to make me uncomfortable or raise my anxiety levels. I really had no idea what was going to happen in the coming month. The first few times hanging out were great. We would drive around, smoke some cigs, listen to music, go out and eat at McDonald's, talk about literature. I actually had a blast. But since I wasn't used to being that social with anyone, but my boyfriend for the longest time, it did mentally wear me out quite fast. I couldn't keep up. I continued to talk to her on Facebook and did reject hanging out maybe 2 or 3 times, mentally worn out. Before she started getting really annoyed and short with me, she started acting possessively towards me, asking me things like if I was blowing her off for my boyfriend. I honestly figured she was just feeling hurt because she didn't really have any friends, and maybe she had just grown attached to me. Things went on like this for a couple of weeks when it started getting worse really fast. If I didn't answer her right away, she would drive 45 minutes from her house to our apartment and ring the buzzer consistently until someone answered the door, and then try to bully me into hanging out with her since she felt like she wasted gas and energy on me. This is where I started distancing myself from her, because I knew in my gut something was wrong, and I think it made her snap. This is when she started waiting for my boyfriend to leave for work before buzzing at all hours of the night, She would drive by the apartment almost daily, sending me message after message on Facebook, calling and texting my phone all the time. One time me and my boyfriend got into a verbal argument, which she had heard since she was standing outside of our window, and she called the cops telling them he was domestically abusing me, and I was deathly embarrassed trying to explain to the cops that. My boyfriend didn't beat me into oblivion. Pissed off, my instinct told me that it was her, since no one else would have done something so drastic and uncalled for. After prying her for an hour, she nonchalantly told me she did in fact do it. I was pissed off, and she kept telling me she cared too much for me to let some man hurt me, that she was worried, wasn't going to put up with his shit, would kill him to ensure I was safe, etc. I felt completely violated, and this crossed the line for me. I started contemplating how to cut her out of my life, preferably without police being involved. The worst happened maybe 2 weeks later, after I found out I was pregnant. Me and my boyfriend were taking a shower together. We did this to save time, water, whatever. And then our doorbell started buzzing. I was exasperated and just told my boyfriend, who was growing annoyed, to ignore it and she would leave. She didn't. She proceeded by buzzing a neighbor and told them she lived with us in the apartment, had forgotten her keys, and needed to be let in. The neighbor unknowingly let her in. So in the shower, me and the BF are just talking when someone starts pounding on our door. Not just knocking, but pounding extremely hard, kicking, jiggling the door handle. Thank God we always bolted, chained, and locked our door. I at this point snapped. I was just so angry I jumped out of the shower, haphazardly threw a towel around myself, and whipped open the door, demanding an explanation as to what the fuck this was, and reminding Lilu that when someone doesn't answer their door, you leave, not try every possible way to get into their house for an hour. Coldly she looked at me, then towards the bathroom, which had the shower still running, and all she said in a low voice was, "You're showering with him? How could you?" My eyes must have widened to 1,000 suns when I responded with, "That's my boyfriend, the father of my child, who I have a relationship. It isn't any of your business, and I think you need to leave now." Her face scrunched into what looked like someone force-fed her lemons through her asshole, and she then told me she wasn't leaving, that we apparently had some sort of relationship together. Not sure where this came from. We were never sexually or romantically involved the whole time I knew her. I was coming back with her. She mentioned she didn't care how pregnant I was, she would forcefully drag me out with her. This terrified me because even though she was very feminine, she had a good 2 feet on. Mine actually did work out, and I wouldn't have stood a chance. I panicked and tried to slam the door as my boyfriend almost took our whole shower down, trying to scramble out to the front door. Upon hearing that, she stuck her foot out to prevent the door closing and started forcing it open until she seen my boyfriend standing there huffing like a bull about to charge. Completely nude, he was too pissed off to even get a towel, which we did actually lulls about afterwards. All he had to do was look at her and tell her to get the fuck out, or he would break her ass if she wouldn't let us close the door. Like most women, I've had lots of creepy encounters with men. Most have been your general leer and follow, a couple wildly inappropriate flirtations from adults when I was a kid, and millions of smile. You're much prettier when you smile. Luckily avoided much true danger, until, funny enough, I was married. Most of the flirtations and "you simply must let me paint you" stopped when I got married, because apparently the perverts I attract respect the sanctity of marriage. So it's funny that my scariest story happens when my husband was sitting right next to me. We were coming back home from a holiday in Europe and arrived very late to the airport. We live in the UK, and public transportation shuts down around midnight, except for buses, which tend to be creep city. There was a taxi company based in the airport, so we just arranged to take their next available driver. More expensive, but safer and less stressful than getting on a bus. Or so we think. So the next available driver comes up to us, introduces himself. He's kind of a ratty-looking guy, probably in his 50s or 60s, but he's looking like an aging band member. Actually, he looked quite a bit like Charlie Watts. He seems nice enough though. I mean, it's the official airport taxi service, so we're presuming these are decent drivers. Everything is pretty normal when we first get in his car. He kind of makes fun of the people who are waiting for the cheaper taxis outside the airport, but he's just being cheeky. At some point he tells us he had problems, lots of problems in the past, and keeps it vague. Me and my husband just nervously laugh and try to relate, even though we're both kind of boring straight arrows. So he tells us he was at a nightclub over the weekend that had 2 floors, and that a woman fell over the railing while he was there. He tells us this story laughing, and I asked if she was okay. He says, "Well, I didn't stick around to find out," and tells us that the woman was his date, and he intimates that he pushed her. He says like, I was right next to her, and I just watched her go down. And then, I made sure I was gone before the police arrived. He's telling us all this, and just cackling away. At this point I'm thinking he's just funny, like this is a completely made-up story, and he's just being whimsically dark. Then he tells us more weird stuff that I can't really remember, but nothing quite as strange as that. This whole time we're both awkwardly laughing, and trying our best to sound like we're not judging this guy. The guy goes from funny and weird guy who makes us slightly uncomfortable to should I tuck and roll the hell out of this taxi? Really quick. He tells us about his son and daughter, and how they don't really talk to him much anymore, big shock. But he tells us that we remind him of his son and daughter. He asks us how old we are, when we met, stuff like that. Then he tells us how nice it is to see such a beautiful young couple who aren't judgmental like everyone else. And then drops the bomb. Alarm husband, I'm going to ask you a question. Can I have sex with your wife tonight? Silence, silence. Peal of howling laughter from our driver, more awkward giggling from us. Okay, well, that's just fine. He's being cheeky, I guess. He's laughing, it's all good. So I'm on edge, because I know we're at his mercy on a winding country road. I forgot to mention this wasn't the city airport we were coming from. It was one of the more rural airports in England, and we lived in a small town at the time. So, narrow winding roads surrounded by forests for a large part of the trip. We get more near our town, and he says, oh yeah, I live around here too. Do you guys mind if I go home to make sure I turned all the lights out? Yeah, we minded, but what the hell could we say? My husband is English and therefore can't verbalize complaints, and I'm scared silent so one, or both, of us just says, yeah, sure. He thanks us for understanding. I'm thinking about how BTK asked his victims to understand his sexual problems. We drive into a pretty nice neighborhood, and there are some lights on in the house, so our driver gets out. I say as soon as I see him go in the house, alarm husband, be prepared to fight because he definitely might come out with a knife. My husband just says, oh, I don't think so, but okay. Now after we survived all this, and I asked him, did you really not think he might try and abduct us? My husband told me yeah, he did think that was a possibility, he just didn't want to make me more scared. In the future, husbands/boyfriends/stronger companions of the world, we're already shitting our pants at a point like this. It is okay, nay much better if you just tell us, yeah, I'm ready to fight this guy, don't worry, I think I can take him. Rather than try and make us not scared anymore. His intentions were good, but my husband's lack of fear and seeming obliviousness just made me more scared, thinking this guy was going to surprise him. Well, the story ends with the guy getting back in the car, my body being incredibly tense and ready to lunge forward or roll out of the taxi. But he just says, thanks, guys, and we go about our business, no stabbing. He continues to be creepy, don't get me wrong. He asks us if we'd like to break into some gated subdivision with him. He offers to ram the gates with his car, and we can all explore it together. And then he asks us if we'd like to rent his apartment, because we're such a nice couple, and he'd give us a deal. Basically weird stuff, but he is driving us back home now. We get out of the car, he compliments us for not being judgmental, and tells us we're a great couple that made him happy. Think he even gave us a hug. For the next few weeks I'm looking outside to see if he's waiting down in the parking lot for us, and he never is. One of the benefits of living in an apartment complex is that I know he couldn't possibly know our exact flat number. I think back at that weird experience now, and I wonder if it could have gone really wrong. Like if we had been a judgmental couple, if we wouldn't have laughed when he told us about his heroin addiction, or his potential nightclub negligent fatality, would that trip to his house have ended with zip ties and a knife? Or, had I been a single woman, would he have asked if he could have sex with me? I know it's cliché, the typical creeper on a dating site thing. But this is my story, and it still shakes me to this day. I didn't have much dating experience at the time. This was back in 2008, and I was going to be a junior in college. I lived in a small town outside of Tacoma, Washington, and attended a university nearby, University of Puget Sound. I was home for the summer, as I wasn't taking summer classes that year. I was 20 at the time. I had an account on several dating sites, but wasn't looking for anything serious. One day in early July, I received a message from Anna Richardson about maybe meeting up, as she lived in Tacoma and attended Everest College. She was a year younger, going into her sophomore year. I checked out her profile, and she had several pictures in addition to her icon. She was interested in art and literature, was majoring in mathematics, kinda ironic, listened to EDM and alt-rock, and played soccer. The woman in the photos was very attractive, she seemed pretty legit, and we seemed to have some things in common, so I agreed. We messaged on the site first. She was thinking we could have dinner at a local Italian restaurant, and go for a walk afterwards. I thought this sounded fine, and suggested we meet at the restaurant on Saturday at 7 or so. She said she was thinking I could pick her up at her apartment, as she didn't have a car to use at the time because she'd recently gotten in a crash. This was kinda strange to me, and I was wondering why she couldn't ask someone for a ride, but I stupidly agreed to pick her up, and she gave me her address. This proved to be my biggest mistake. I was also wanting to be a gentleman to my date. We then exchanged phone numbers and spoke on the phone only once, and it was brief, just discussing the details of the date again. I'd pick her up at her place around 6:30, and we'd get to the restaurant at 7. It was a female's voice on the phone, and didn't sound old, or anything, so I wasn't worried about anything really. So on Saturday, I got directions to her place and set off. She lived in a pretty nice section of town in a townhome with 3 stories that was a condo-type thing, I guess. She informed me that her landlord owned the building and lived on the 1st floor and rented out the top 2 floors. Anna lived on the 3rd floor. There was a set of stairs on the side of the townhome, where there was a door to each floor, but the 1st floor also had a front door. It was kind of a weird setup. I went up the side stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door. It felt like forever that I waited, probably around 5 minutes though, before someone answered. A rather large, middle-aged man, with the most bizarre look on his face, opened the door. I don't even know how to describe it. Other than that, there wasn't anything weird about his appearance or outfit. Now my warning bells are going off, but I guess I had the idiotic thought, like maybe he's her dad? So I dumbly said, is Anna here? But decided it was time to get out of there, didn't wait for a response, and tried to turn around, and he literally grabbed my arm and rasped, "I am Anna." I was smaller, shorter, and much younger than him, so it'd be kinda hard to fend him off. I kept trying to wrench away unsuccessfully, and began screaming for help, as he repeatedly tried to pull me through the door, and he finally let me go. I didn't hesitate to take this opportunity to get the heck out of there, and thankfully, he didn't try to follow me. Got in my car and went home. I was frustrated that no one had heard and tried to help me, and immensely freaked out, naturally. I didn't know if I should head to the police and tell them, or what they'd do. That evening, I told my roommate the whole story when I got home. Knew I was going on a date, but didn't know the circumstances and, obviously, didn't know about the guy. He convinced me to report it to the police, and to take pics of Anna and I's messages if I still had them just in case. I went down to our local police station the next day, and informed them of the whole thing, and provided them with the pictures. I kinda got the vibe that they weren't taking me seriously, but they said they would go down to the guy's house to question him about it. They had me file a report. Now this is the really crazy part. The police telephoned me the following morning. I wanted to hear from them sooner, but whatever. I know they're busy, and told me to come by because they had some information about the guy. So I did, and they told me that the guy had just seemingly vanished. They spoke to the landlord, and she said he must have left in the middle of the night because his car was gone that morning. I guess the landlord had a key and opened the door to his apartment, even though they didn't have a search warrant, and all his stuff was apparently there. The landlord told them that she didn't know much about the guy, but that he seemed normal enough but didn't leave his apartment much. She provided them with his name. They did a background check. Nothing. The police advised me to delete my account on that website and suggested I change my phone number to be safe. So I did. They told me that at that point, there wasn't much else they could do. I never got any follow-ups or updates on my report. Never encountered the guy again. Of course, I still have many questions. Who did I speak to on the phone? It wasn't like a pre-recorded phone call, because she addressed me by name and knew what I was talking about. Who was the girl in the pictures? I didn't know where he got them, and I didn't know about reverse image search at the time. What were his plans? It was so bizarre. A few years ago, I was working at a gym in my city. I had recently graduated from university and was working a part-time job in my field and needed another job to supplement my hours. The fall before starting to work there, I began personal training with a coach at the gym and loved it. The gym had a warm and friendly community feel, which was perfect for me. I loved working at the gym. I worked the front desk and was mainly in charge of answering the phone, greeting people, and bringing clients on gym tours. Often, there would be long periods of time where I wouldn't be too busy, and I could chat with members at the gym. I loved it, There are so many cool people that go to the gym, but also, I came to learn so many weird people, which ultimately led to me quitting the job. When I started working there, I was a red-headed, fit, 22-year-old, fair-skinned, friendly, outgoing girl. Almost as soon as I began working there, I started to experience many odd and awkward advances from people working out at the gym. I had one guy come up to me and say, "I just want to tell you that you are the most beautiful person I have ever seen." Many people asked for my number or my Instagram, and luckily for me, at the time, I didn't have either to give, and I was also regularly asked on dates. I was single at the time, but that was by choice. I just didn't want to be dating. So, I always gently declined. Unfortunately, there were numerous occasions where situations with male members escalated, and my boss did not react as sympathetic as I thought she would. I found out later that every time I reported an incident, she would make remarks to people that I should appreciate the affection and just go on the dates. This post is about one of these creepy moments with a client. It's important for you to know that the front desk was right at the front of the gym, so every client would pass me on their way in and out. Part of my job was to greet them and to say goodbye to them. The front desk was near the main water fountain, the change rooms, and it was open and able to be seen by all the members working out on the first floor. There began to be this man, in his late 30s, early 40s. Like I said, I was 22, who would walk by me and stare at me really intensely. I always felt it and turned around, and he would be staring at me. After a couple weeks, he came up to me and told me he thought I had a beautiful smile. Sometimes this is nice, but something felt completely off about it. I reported it to my boss. This kept continuing for weeks, and he would come in and smile at me, stare at me while he was working out, and comment on my smile whenever he could. Most nights, I didn't work the closing shift because the gym is 24/7 during the week, but one Friday night, I worked the close shift for a coworker who couldn't make it in. Towards the end of my shift, around 8 p.m., the member came in. This evening I was feeling particularly tired. He used this as an excuse to talk to me. He stopped me while I was walking by and said, "Where's the smile today? You look so much prettier when you smile." As usual, I just kinda carried on. A few minutes later, he came up and asked if we had tweezers because he got a sliver in his finger. I looked in our first aid kit, and we did, and I gave them to him. He wasn't able to get it out himself, and so he asked me for my help. I found this weird, but I was one of the only employees left in the building, and I felt obliged, so I grabbed his hand with one hand, and with the other, tweezed out his sliver. Before he carried on, he said, "I don't think I'll ever wash this hand again." I'm not kidding, he literally said that. It was so creepy. Then I started to avoid him. He left at 9:35 p.m. I remember because on the way out, he said another comment about my smile, and how I must be happier because he likes it more that way. I looked at the time he left because I wondered what I would do if he stood there for a whole 30 minutes until close. My night finished normally, and I closed by 10:15 p.m. The gym had a very dark parking lot at night, and we were one of the only buildings still open, so I was anticipating the parking lot to be empty, with the exception of my car. This was not the case. Beside my car was another car with headlights on. There was a trail nearby. Maybe it was people going for a walk. It was strange though that the car was parked so close to mine, but I continued to walk forward. As I got closer, I realized it was the member from the gym. This was so weird because, as I said, he left the gym at 9:35 p.m. Did he wait here for me to leave? Why was he parked beside my car? Panic went through my whole body. I felt like I couldn't turn back now and go back inside because he had already seen me. Not sound logic, but I just wanted to drive away. So I continued towards my car. As I was getting in, he held the door and told me that he has never felt for anyone what he feels for me, and a lot of other weird things I don't remember because I was so creeped out. He then asked me for my number, to which I said no. He asked me why and wouldn't let me leave until I gave him an explanation. I continually said I didn't want to, and he kept confessing his love for me, hoping that eventually I would cave. I got in my car, managed to close the door, and started driving, fearful he would follow me. The next day, I was working the afternoon shift. At one point, I walked into the studio room, and he was in there. I didn't see him come in, so I was really shocked. I turned around to leave, and he said, "What? No smile? Wow, okay, you're gonna be like this now. You're gonna get in a mood about it?" I just left. I reported it all to my boss, and he was banned from this location of the gym, even though there were 2 other locations in the city that I work at and he works out at. A year later, I started my membership back up at that gym. I went to work out there, only to find him there again. I don't know why he was allowed back. I have never gone back again. 2016. Met a girl on Plenty of Fish, which in the southern US is asking for a lot of trouble. She seems smart, more of talker than most, but had a hard time discerning my texts. She tells me she is from Ireland originally, and that she isn't a native English speaker. She speaks fluent Celtic Gaelic. I am not a linguist, but I believe her. She really likes me, asks for my number often, so I bite and give it to her. She calls nightly, and I feel like this could turn into something real. So I ask her out. We initially agreed to meet in a public place. My area has a lot of parks. I was going to cook, something I take pride in even though I'm an amateur at best. So I make chicken fajitas and get ready. It rains while I am cooking, so I call her. She doesn't want to be out in the heat and wetness, so I agree to meet her at her condo. I had made it a rule to never go to a woman's place long the first date, and never bring her to mine, but I thought circumstances dictated an exception. She sends me the address and Google Map it and head out. 15 minutes later, and I am in a bad part of town. The people are giving me dirty looks as I drive down the street, looking for her complex. I find it, and it is in bad shape. Rust barbed wire fences and kids with no clothes running around. It's bad. I start to get a feeling I need to leave, but force myself to keep going since I didn't want to stand her up. I find a place out of sight to park and walk in. She's on a second-floor condo, and the walkway shifts while I am walking it. It's unstable, may fall at any time. I feel like Indiana Jones. I arrive at her place, and she invites me in. She looks little like her pictures online, and has less of an accent in person. She seems charming, but stays extremely close to me at all times. That's when I get a really good look at her place. It is filthy. Not like clutter or disorganized, literal filth. The carpet is matted, stacks of items covered in food waste and cobwebs, dirty underwear everywhere, tampons, pet feces, bathroom is full of flies. It's like a cartoon or some kind of movie scene. Nothing could ever be this bad in real life, I thought, but it was very real. She apologizes for the mess, but I can see that it's been this way for a long time. She asked when we can eat, so I unpack the food on her kitchen counter. Every time I bump something, roaches flee to the next available shadow. I start to dry heave. I am feeling sick. I prepare her a plate and go to sit. The couch doesn't have cushions or springs, just a liner and a wood frame. I sit on the matted floor. From the lower perspective, I see a dog trapped in a kennel buried under dirty clothes and books. He is 3 sizes too big for the kennel. His face and paws are mashed against the grated door. I immediately say, "Oh, I love dogs, can I see him?" thinking she hid him from me. She says he's a monster and we can have him out. I insist, saying I have a way with dogs. I kinda do. She lets him out, and he is the nicest but dirtiest dog I have ever seen. He comes to me, covered in urine and saliva, and lays on me whining. I wanted to cry. She tells me there is a cat somewhere in the mess too, but she gets stuck to things and she hasn't seen her in days. My heart sinks. At this point I can't handle anymore. I'm a nice guy, I give everyone a chance, but this was too much. I try to leave. She jumps on me and starts grabbing me, trying to start something, but my dick isn't going anywhere near an animal-abusing, filthy woman like her. So I tell her I need to leave. I have an emergency to deal with. She follows me to my car and tries to make me kiss her. I don't want to, so she gets me with the old look down there trick. I look down and I feel her tongue all over my face. I almost slap her. I get in my car and break her off over a text. She claims she is legally blind and can't take care of herself. I tell her good luck and goodbye. Worst date ever. I had been chatting with a girl on a dating site. We decided to meet for a date. I went. She was there at the prearranged meeting spot. Now, I get that we generally want to look our best in the profile pics on a dating site, but nice clothes, makeup, and appealing angles is one thing. This girl was one of those that looked like a completely different person IRL, and you only saw the similarities to the photos after a few minutes. Okay, not starting off well. It turns out reality her is actually quite frumpy compared to internet her. But that didn't matter because I shit the bed the very first thing I did anyway. I wanted to seem confident, so I strode up to her and with an upbeat tone said, "Hi, you must be Sarah." She just looked at me for several seconds before saying, "It's Emily." I have no idea how I fucked that up. I knew her name was Emily and was not even talking to anybody named Sarah. This was back in the early 2010s, and Neil Strauss, The Game, had just entered the public conscience. For the record, I will say I tried reading that book like 3 times to see what all the fuss was about, but always gave up after less than a 1/3 of the book. It simply sucks as a book. Well, Sarah or Emily, or whatever the fuck, had apparently studied the game intently to protect herself from any of its devilries, and despite my profused apologies, she was adamant that I had tried one of the negging strategies from the book. We went for a walk in a park and tried making conversation, and it went badly all the way. We passed a little beer garden type place. Ah, thought I to myself, surely some alcohol can smoothen out the evening for us a bit. I suggest we go in for a beer and she agrees. Time for my next wrong turn. She was making zero effort, and I was too young and dumb to call it quits when I should. Instead I sat there and tried to improve our rapport, but she was making zero effort, and instead I made the classic mistake of drinking more to try and make her more interesting. So after a bit I am too drunk to handle anything smoothly, and certainly way more drunk than she was. Time for my fuck-up finale. In a last-ditch effort to try and make her interesting, I suggest that perhaps we go back to my place and smoke some pot. She squinted her eyes at me in anger and said her brother was an addict, and it all started because he liked weed. At this point my senses finally caught up to me, and I said, well, I think we can both agree this has been a shit evening for the both of us. How about we call it a night and go our separate ways? She just said, yeah. We paid and walked out without even saying goodbye to each other. I told y'all my town was a breeding ground for crazies. So, I used to perform weekly for about a year or so, singing with my friend, who is a guitarist, at this cute little cafe down by the beach. My anxiety had gotten pretty bad by the end of last year, so I haven't been back since, but that's not really relevant. There was a guy there who played the piano, who I'll name Elliot. You'll soon see why. I'd never really talked to him too much as the cafe was always busy, and despite being very, very small, it was always packed to the brim. Due to this, people generally tended to stay with their groups of friends, as it's quite hard to circulate and speak to people, except to congratulate performers. He stuck out like a sore thumb, as he had one of those stupid haircuts that are shaved all the way around, save for a long poncy bit on top. He also frequently wore fedoras and full 3-piece suits, even in the height of summer. One day I got talking to him, as he frequented the place so often, that we now had many friends in common. He wasn't from here, had a very thick, posh accent. His parents were rich, and he had inherited a large sum of money from a grandparent that had recently passed away. He seemed like a nice guy, so I didn't mind his company. He appeared to me to be one of the my lady types which I didn't care for, but he was now a friend, so why would that bother me? We all always went out after the cafe closed to a bar in the center of town that also held their own buskers nights, so after getting drunk and playing at the cafe, we would get drunker and play there. As we were there so often, the bar would sometimes have a lock-in, and we would all sit around playing songs and drinking. It was pretty nice, actually. One of these nights, we were hitting it off, but not, I thought, in a romantic sense. He told me that he thought we should just hang out together without the others and get to know each other. A friendly offer from a friend, I thought, so I agreed. He messaged me the next day and asked if I still wanted to hang out. I said sure. Why not? He came over that Thursday with a bouquet of roses in a 3-piece suit, fedora, and I shit you not, and pocket watch. I thought it was nice that he brought flowers, but I hoped so badly that he didn't think this was what I thought he thought it was. He thought it was. He took me to a restaurant. I thought we were going to a bar, and paid for dinner, though I insisted I pay for my own. He wouldn't let me. We went to a buskers night my friend was hosting and I sang. Then we got a cab into town to go to the clubs. You could tell very quickly that he probably had never been in this kind of environment before. He was awkward and looked uncomfortable, but made the effort to have a good time. I was just wilding out, dancing, bumping into friends, having a good time. Then, during Iconopops I Love It, romantic, he taps me on the shoulder and says kiss me in this awkward posh boy voice. I didn't know what to do, so I just pretended I hadn't heard him. We went outside to smoke and go on to the next bar, and he was telling everyone, this is my date. Yeah, this is P, my date. People he didn't even know. It was awkward as shit, and I didn't know what to say to him. Stupidly, I brushed it off, and we continued our night. I bumped into some of my friends who own a tattoo shop, so we decided to go back there, have a few more drinks, and I got some pretty shitty, but pretty cute little tattoos. It's a habit of mine, and I should probably stop. He passed out on the couch, and at about 5 a.m. I called it quits and went home in a cab. He jumped in and went home after me. The next day he asked if I wanted to go out again to this bar that honestly, I do really love 'cause they play some awesome music, but I just palmed him off and told him that, sorry, thanks for the offer, but I'm broke. He offered to pay for my night. I told him I couldn't even afford travel there, and he offered to pay for that too. I didn't go. About a week later, I was back at the cafe when one of my friends asked me, "Oh, where's your boyfriend?" I laughed it off, like, oh haha, my friends are ribbing me. Cosme and Elliot hung out. My other friend informed me that in fact, no. He had been there every day that week telling everyone that P is my girlfriend. We went on a date. I was mortified and told her that in no uncertain terms was I his girlfriend, and that we have never dated. It had been my birthday a few days before, and he turns up with 4 gift bags, filled to the brim with presents. T-shirts of my favorite TV show, jewelry, no diamonds, thank God, dresses, gift vouchers, you name it. What the fuck, right? I told him that I couldn't take them. He told me there was no way he could return them, but I reiterated that I'm so sorry, but I just can't accept these. He got pretty mad, but I don't know what he was expecting. I began distancing myself from him very quickly, and 2 weeks later I hadn't spoken to him at all, but received several messages and texts a day asking what I was up to and if I wanted to hang out. I didn't reply. He then started posting on his Facebook that I see girls out partying and they always go for the douchebag guys. Then they cry when they get hurt. Why can't they just take a chance on a gentleman? As the weeks went on, they got progressively more and more irate and more scary. He changed his profile picture of himself, in his fedora, looking into the distance, holding a dead pheasant in one hand and a hunting rifle in the other. I freaked. I began seeing his car driving past my house several times a day, yet he knew no one in my area. I'm pretty out of the way, and he lived about 40 minutes from my house. He knocked on the door a few times, and luckily I wasn't in, and my brother told him to get lost. Roses started turning up on my doorstep with little notes like, I see you, playing hard to get, and I'm waiting. I was officially freaked and pretty scared. He'd amped up the woe is me, Elliot Roger manifesto-esque Facebook posts and texts. In the end I had to tell him to please leave me alone. I never dated you. I'm not your girlfriend, and I'm not going to be. Stop leaving shit at my house, which he denied. Stop driving by. Stop calling. Stop texting. In all fairness to him, whilst he continued to do so, they were way less frequent, till he eventually stopped. He had moved back home of the summer of last year, on a break from college, so going to the cafe wasn't a problem. Then he returned. I had a boyfriend at the time, another cunt. There are some pretty gruesome stories about him and his mother, which I can't wait to share to get an opinion. And it was his first time there, seeing me sing, meeting my friends. It was uncharacteristically quiet at the cafe, so there were plenty of empty tables, and only a few of my friends there, who were at a table of their own. Elliot turned up on his own, and just sat at our table. He introduced himself to my boyfriend, and just sat smiling at us. Awkward. I had told my boyfriend about him previously, but I don't think he made the connection, and I didn't really have an opportunity that night to tell him. I got up to go to the bathroom, then go for a smoke. Elliot followed me out after I was done in the bathroom and offered me a cigarette, despite the fact I was already smoking. I declined, then became acutely aware that we were the only ones outside. Great. My parents split up this summer. I wanted to kill myself. She cheated on him again. Oh. I didn't know what to say, so I just said sorry. We made small talk, and I went inside. My boyfriend was furious, asking me why the fuck I hadn't told him that I'd be engaged. I asked him what the fuck he was talking about. I'd never been engaged, but even if I had, why would I bring that up? What relevance is it to anything? He told him that Elliot had told him that we had been engaged for about 6 weeks before he broke up with me, because I was too clingy, jealous, and possessive. But it's so great that we can still hang out all the time and go places together without it being awkward. I hadn't even been on a date with him, and hadn't seen him since May. This was September. My anxiety coincided with this, so I haven't been back, but it has nothing to do with him. I told him to fuck off, fuck himself, stop lying about me, and to keep my name out of his mouth. Luckily I haven't heard from him since the beginning of this year. Hey, long time no talk. You still owe me a dinner, cheeky. No response. Freaks me out to think about, especially as every so often, he adds pictures on his Facebook of his new kills when he goes hunting. I abhor hunting. His new guns, and his new hunting knives every time he buys one, which seems to be often. I don't have him on Facebook, but out of curiosity, I'll have a sneaky look because I seem to have a sickness where I can't help sneak a peek at the profiles of people I don't like. So this happened about 14 years ago. I was 21, brand new, and it was the days of MySpace. I never use my real name online, and was in the mode of constantly posting pictures of me smoking, etc. So yeah, I happened to work at a local sandwich shop, and upon taking an order from a customer, I hear, "Hey, aren't you under MySpace name?" To which I asked why, of course, and he proceeded to tell me his MySpace name, and I realize we have randomly commented on mutual friends' pages. Okay, whatever. He and his friend sit in the dining area and eat their lunch, but before leaving he came back to the counter. I thought he wanted a refill on his drink, so I went to the counter to ask him what he would like. "Would you like to get drinks with me sometime?" I was a little surprised but fresh out of a bad breakup and was ready to date, so I said sure, why not? I told him to message me online later and we could work it out. Cut to 2 days later, it's Friday, and he picks me up and we head to a bar across town. I had known this bar was there forever as I grew up there, but had never been inside. Wow. We were the youngest ones there by about 30 years, and there were literally only about 10 people total inside, including us and the bartender. Weird. Whatever. We have a few drinks, play some pool, and it's time to leave. I kept my pace and only had 2 cocktails because I didn't want to get drunk with someone I didn't know. He, unbeknownst to me, was about to be pretty tossed. So we leave, and not wanting to go home, I agreed to go to his house and hang out some more. He lived with his grandmother at the time and had a pool table. We wanted the house for a bit, him showing me random pics of him growing up, awards won, etc. We play a game, and I let him know I need to be getting home. I lived about 20 minutes away by car. He says he's too drunk to drive, and that I should stay. I'm what? No. Now, I lived with my mom, and we didn't always see eye to eye. So calling her at 2 to 3 a.m. and waking her up to ask for a ride was not in my list of plans. I told him fine, I would walk. It would have taken me over an hour to walk home, but I was not about to sleep at this guy's house, and would have rather taken my chances. The route home didn't go through any bad areas, and I had been a pedestrian for years at that point, so I was used to walking everywhere and was fine with it. All of a sudden, he can drive and doesn't want me walking home alone. Again, whatever. We get to my house, and I thank him for the ride, and now he tells me he is too drunk to drive and can't drive home. If I let this guy drive home and he really is drunk and gets into an accident and hurts himself or anyone else, I would feel terribly guilty. Before you shame me, I know now that yes, I should have thought about that before he drove me home and should have just walked. I wish I had. The place my mom and I lived in was 3 stories, and I had the whole bottom floor to myself and a makeshift living room with couches, so I figured F it, sleep it off on the couch and go home in the morning. By now I had already decided this was going to be the only date we ever went on. Not because of the whole driving situation, but I just wasn't into him. He proceeds to lay on my bed the minute I let him inside like some stray dog or something. So being tired and annoyed, and just basically over it, I said fine, I'll sleep on the couch. Well, I don't know how long I was asleep, or how the hell he even stayed awake, because it took me forever to fall asleep knowing he was there, and this was all just too weird. I wake up to this guy's hands around my throat. Well, kinda woke up. I remember laying there with my eyes closed, and my mind thinking WTF? So I pretended to roll over to basically let him know I wasn't unconscious, and he stopped. 20 minutes later, same thing. This time I sat up, pushed him away, and started yelling at him. What the fuck are you doing? Get the F out now. And the strangest thing was it was like he wasn't fully there. His eyes were open, but it's like he was in a trance, and wasn't even fully aware of what was happening. I grabbed his keys and wallet off the table, opened the door, shoved him outside, threw his keys and wallet at him, and slammed the door. He never knocked or anything, and I kept the lights off so he couldn't see me watching him through the window, phone in hand ready to call 911. My mom was 2 floors above asleep. He kind of staggered off where I couldn't see him, so I just sat on my bed listening. 30 minutes later, I heard his car start and drive off. I logged onto MySpace right away, blocked him, and blocked his number in my phone. I showed my boss's picture the next day, explained the situation, and just let him know that if I ever saw him walking again, that I was walking to the back until he left, and to just tell him I quit. Never heard from him again. To this day I can't sleep on my back. I sleep on my side, and both arms are always curled up in front of me with my hands tucked under my chin. Blankets too. I'm 35 now, and this has never changed. I've been with my so for 13 years, and once I explained why I slept like that, he stopped asking, and is used to it. When I was about 9 years old, female, my family used to live in a remote area on the outskirts of town. Considering the location of the suburb, that area was surrounded by warehouses and such. At the time, my family did not have a phone in the house, and neither did our neighbors. There were no cell phones back then, or they were a luxury, and not everyone could afford one. This took place in end of 90s. So, if I needed to call my mom whilst she was at work, I had to either go to my dad's work or a company next to his, which was closer, to make a phone call. My dad's work was a relatively short walk from our house, probably 30 minutes or less. My dad was working at a huge unloading dock for metallurgical/natural resources shipments. In order to get to my dad's work, I had to walk past another adjacent company, just like the one where my dad was working. I will call it Docks 2. My dad's work, as well as Docks 2, had a sort of watchtower. It is just a cabin mounted at the top of a tall platform, and you need to go up a decent amount of stairs to get to the top. There was always a guard inside overseeing the whole yard from the top, during the day and night, to make sure no one is in danger/no break-ins. The phones were located only on-site watchtowers at the time. Docks 2 were much closer to our house, about 10 minutes walk. One day, as I've done many times before, I went to the Docks 2 to make a call. I climbed the stairs, knocked on the door, and was welcomed in by a guard I used to see quite often and knew well. However, that day he wasn't alone. New guy, 28 at the time, was there. Apparently, he was a new employee hired to work shifts. He was this very tanned white guy always wearing military-style outfits. I was just an average-looking child, looking exactly my age. My hair were very blonde, which made my checks always appear rosy red, and give me even more childish appearance. When the new guy saw me that day, he wouldn't take his eyes off me. As soon as I was about to finish my call with my mom, it's just one room so everyone can hear my conversation with her, the new guy went outside to smoke. When I came out, he smiled at me and asked me what my name is and whether I came there often to make calls. I don't remember what I said, but I felt very shy because he was just staring deeply into my eyes. I will call him the creep. Fast forward, and I came to that tower again to make a call. And there he was again, but that time he was alone. I spoke to my mum, and as I was about to leave, he asked me if I want any tea, to which I refused. He then proceeded to ask how my school was going and things like that. He offered to help me with my homework, however I told him I've got it all sorted. Harmless but strange. On a side note, I just want to say that what gave me shivers when I was near him is that whenever he looked at me he looked drunk, which was very unsettling. Mind you, he wasn't actually drunk, but his eyes would get so hazy and his face would flush red. Some time later I saw him again. That time I was walking to my dad's work with my friend, and he was doing some digging in the docks too. When he saw me through the metal fence that was separating us, he just leaned against his shovel and just stared at me. He didn't say hi or anything like that. After those encounters, for quite some time I took alternative routes to see my dad or play with puppies at my dad's work or make calls to my mum, because he really creeped me out. However, one day I had to call my mum urgently. My dad's work phone didn't work, so I had to go to the Docks 2 tower, hoping I won't see him. The creep was there, and oh boy, he was so happy I came. He was complaining how I don't come anymore to see him. As I was making a call, he grabbed another chair and sat right next to me, very close. It took a while for the call because my mum was busy with something, and someone went to get her whilst I was on the line. It felt like hours waiting, and the creep was just sitting next to me, looking at me and smiling. When my mum finally got to the phone, he got up and went to make me tea and brought some biscuits. When I was done talking, he insisted I have some tea with him. I didn't, and he just kept on trying to strike a conversation, but this time the tone of conversation was different. He asked me how old exactly I was, and I told him 12 or 13. I have no idea why I've lied that I was older than 9. He told me his age, and although I knew he was much older, I felt really weirded out that he wanted to talk to me so badly, or had any interest in being my friend. My alarms did go off every time I was around him, but I guess I didn't feel overly in danger. He then proceeded to tell me that I was beautiful and asked me whether I had a boyfriend. He asked me if I have already dated boys and what type of boys I liked. I was so uncomfortable and so eager to leave at that point, but he would just keep dragging me into these weird conversations. I could tell he was drinking that day. When I began moving towards the door, he followed me. Eventually we both were outside, however. In order to get down from the tower, you need to walk this narrow path towards the stairs. He stood blocking it so that I couldn't leave. He got very close to me, and I freaked out. The only escape tactic I could come up with as a child was to pretend that I'm seeing someone from the top of the tower. So I began waving my hand at the road down the bottom and towards houses in the distance, pretending I see someone I know and saying, "Oh look, that's my uncle, he is waving at me." The creep looked in that direction, but either didn't care or could tell that I was lying. I kept on telling him that the uncle who waved back is a big angry man, and if I won't come down this instance and go home, we both are going to be in trouble. The creep didn't budge. He got even closer and eventually pressed me against the railing. He kept on asking me his weird questions whilst I was terrified to move, because I didn't want to move my body against his, if that makes any sense, so I just froze. He asked me if we'd come on a date with him, and that he is looking for a girlfriend. And at that particular moment someone was coming up the stairs to the tower, so he let me go, but asked me to come back. I have not told anyone about this encounter at that stage because I was afraid that my parents would get angry. I also felt very embarrassed and thought that people would judge me for what's happened. Sometime later I was home, and it was around 9 p.m. I know the time because it was my bedtime. Suddenly a car came into our driveway. I came to see who it was through the front room window, and I could see it was the creep, but this time with other guys, blasting music in his car and shouting my name. I have no idea how he knew where I lived. He must have followed me one day. My dad was outraged. He asked me who these people were, but before I could even answer, he rushed outside. Apparently the creep asked for me to go out with him and his friends. My dad obviously refused, saying that I am a child and too young to hang out with them or go out at this time of the night, and that if he sees any one of them ever again, he will beat the living day out of them. So they drove away. I was so upset with my dad that he called me a child in front of them. So stupid. I think because we lived so far away from everything, I was really keen to make friends, as there were no kids around as such. For a while after that I haven't seen the creep or heard of him. Significant time later, I was walking to my dad's work again, and I've completely forgotten about the creep. He was working in the docks too with his friends, maybe those that came with him that night in the car, or maybe these were just his co-workers. I got scared when I saw him, and even thought he shouted, "Hi." I pretended not to know him. He said something to his friends, and I remember so clearly how one of his friends exclaimed loudly, "Her." I guess he told them about me or his interest in me, but no one expected me to be a child. I looked at the guy that exclaimed. He was staring at me in an utter disbelief. He must have been 20 to 25 or so, I think, and the creep was saying something to him. His friend screamed at him, "Have you lost your mind?" Clearly the creep didn't see me as a child like everyone else did. Fast forward again, maybe half a year later. One day I was home alone in the evening waiting for my parents to come back from work. We lived in a very safe community, so sometimes I'd be home myself for a little bit after school till my parents got home. I was playing a game whereby I was a singer. I had this stage created in the living room, and I was performing in front of chairs, pretending chairs were my live audience. It was pitch black outside. At some point during my performance, I see someone staring at me through the living room window. That person must have been crouching down, as only top of the face could be seen from the bottom. As soon as that person realized I saw them, they run away. I was so embarrassed that someone saw me performing, scared and shocked at the same time, that I was literally glued to the floor. I don't know whether that was him. Our dog didn't react at all, maybe because music was playing very loud. I was scared to go outside the house to check, but peered through the window, however no one was there. That person had to climb over a wooden fence to get to our living room window. I told my parents about it. I've also asked my friend whether it was him who came around, but he said it wasn't him. I don't know if my friend felt shy to admit he was watching me, or whether it was the creep. To finish this up, one day I went to the docks too with my dad, as my dad needed something from there for work. I saw the old guard that I knew well, and asked about the creep, and was told that he doesn't work there anymore. I don't know what happened of him. I never told my parents about what's happened. I guess you could say I go for a certain kind of guy. Tall, handsome, well-dressed, driven, intellectual, with a touch of hipster and geek thrown in there. I guess you could say I have high standards. Therefore, I spent a lot of time screening potential dates with extended messages, chatting or texting before we met in person. I like to believe that because I basically raised myself on the internet, I have a good sixth sense for creeps and weirdos. I call it my FIF, funny inner feeling. George was everything I seemed to be looking for. He rocked a pompadour and a 6 o'clock shadow with the ease of Ryan Gosling. His profile was rife with eloquent language, and his messages to me were flowery and deep. We touched upon philosophy, literature, and fantastic music, and I was quickly smitten. We started texting, and our texts were similarly full of excellent vocabulary and unique conversation topics. One chilly fall night, I went out with some of my friends to an independent hip-hop night, and I drank more whiskey sours than I care to admit. While sober Walnut Whale may not have been so reckless, tipsy Walnut Whale felt like texting George at 1 a.m. asking him if he wanted to meet up for pizza felt like a good idea. After all, spontaneity generally leads to good things and excellent adventures, right? I walked into the pizza place and saw George sitting amidst all the empty tables awaiting me. He was even more beautiful than in his photographs, and my heart skipped a beat. Our conversation rambled and weaved itself for hours. We had an excellent rapport, and I felt entirely at ease with this man. That's when at around 5 a.m., he offered to take me to his house to watch a movie. He had made I was not alarmed. However, I very firmly told him I would be happy to accompany him home. But I was not the sort of woman who fucks on the first date. With a smile that dented his dimples, he told me he respected that and linked his hand with mine. We practically skipped to his home, still babbling wildly at one another. I was so full of excitement, I felt that we had a real, tangible connection. When we reached his abode, I became even more impressed. He lived in the basement of a massive old mansion. He had 5 roommates, all women and all professional artists. As we tiptoed downstairs to his lair, I was assaulted on all sides by good taste, and that only continued as we hit his cave. Full to the brim of awesome art and interesting artifacts, I found myself even more fascinated with him. We both curled up on his bed, comfortably enjoying one another's company as he queued up the student film he had made a few years prior. It was some sort of 3D mess of colors and lines set to Brian Eno, but truth be told we weren't paying much attention to it. George stared at me, and then he went in for the first kiss. And when he pulled away, he had changed. His mellow, happy attitude had intensified, but not in a sexy way. His eyes had turned stony, his features had sharpened, and his grip on me tightened. "I'm James Bond, you know." I giggled nervously. Suddenly all my alarm bells were going off at once. "I'm sorry, I've never seen the movies." His eyes narrowed as he regarded me. "What I'm saying is don't get too close. Don't get close at all." "What?" We had been having such a great time. I was incredibly confused with this sudden Jekyll and Hyde personality switch. "Let's watch your movie." Attempting to back out of the situation gracefully, and thinking perhaps he just showed nervousness strangely, I inched slightly away from him and leaned back, trying to appear nonchalant as I fixed my eyes to the TV screen. In reality, I was on alert, every nerve in my body ready for flight. I'm a big girl, not fat, just tall and Amazonian. George was about the same height and build as me, and I knew I could probably take him if something happened, but I wanted to tactfully extract myself from the situation before that happened. Backing off seemed like the wrong thing to do. I felt George tense beside me before he jumped on top of me, trying to force his hand up my shirt. "George," I protested past his reaching tongue. "I told you, I'm not going to fuck on the first date." My heart was beating a drumline in my chest. I didn't want to become violent in case something even worse happened, but I was pushing him off of me as intensely as I dared. "Then why the fuck did you come over to my house in the middle of the night?" "I told you, I'm James Bond." As he bellowed in my face, I shoved him off of me and stood up all in one quick motion. As I snatched up my purse and charging phone as quickly as possible, his demeanor softened again. "Look, Walnut Whale, I'm sorry. I can't. My ex-girlfriend, she really fucked me over, you know? I'm broken. I can't love." He opened his arms, trying to get me to come to him again. Something deep within me twinged, some inkling of compassion for this suddenly broken man in front of me, but I knew it was a ploy. I buttoned up my jacket and shoved on my hat. "I need to go home." Again, his expression changed. He set his jaw and a flash of hatred passed his visage. "Fine. Fucking fine. I'll walk you out." "No, that's okay, Dash," I protested. "And oh, I said I am going to walk you out." Meekly I nodded. I made a beeline to the basement door, fumbling with the lock until I was free into glorious frigid early morning sunshine. My breath fogging in front of me, George followed me like a kicked puppy. At the gate, I paused to say goodbye to him, full of confusion and regret. He stared at me, the man I had met earlier that night, all gentleness and handsome aloofness. Then he grabbed both of my arms in a vice grip and attempted to kiss me. I turned my face sideways, and he collided with my cheek, and his fingers tightened around my arms so hard that I had bruises the next day. "George, you're hurting me. George, I need to catch my bus." Wordlessly, He released me and stonily watched me walk away until I rounded the corner. I haven't heard from him since then, but I have seen him at the bars, and he is always laughing and looking perfectly normal and approachable. My little sister is 17 and is the sweetest girl imaginable. She's overcome an eating disorder, has built up her self-confidence, and is kicking ass in her life. However, when she was a bit younger, she made a few bad decisions, and one of them is still haunting her. As her big brother, I feel like I really want to do something, but I moved out for college, and there's not much I can do when I'm not living at home. When she was 15, she met this boy named Dalton in her rehab program. She was specifically there for her eating disorder, but they had group therapy sessions with kids who had all sorts of problems. He was there as part of a probation sentence because he apparently did something super illegal, and now has like an 8 o'clock curfew and owes the state a ton of money still. I don't know the full story. He never told her what he did, but he told her the reason he was in therapy was due to his severe anger issues. He said, "When I get angry, it's like a bomb explodes in my chest. I black out and I forget what I do," which is scary enough. Nobody wants to have someone like that around them. But he took a liking to my sister. He's constantly touching her, putting his arm around her, tickling her, trying to hug her. My sister's confided in our parents and all of her therapy leaders about it, and they all tell him to knock it off when they see it. But she says she's afraid to do it when they're alone because he gets so angry. He said multiple times, "I know that I'm eventually going to kill someone one day. I'm going to spend my life in jail. There's no reason I should try to go to school or get a job." She was so uncomfortable she had herself removed from that therapy group, but he knows where she lives and what her activities are. She made the mistake of telling him where her church is, and so now he's showing up every Sunday. He also has weird things that trigger his anger. One time she was singing in the choir and he marched up, grabbed her by the arm, and told her that they needed to talk. Out in the hall, he had a fit and told her that music triggers his anger, and he needed her to talk to him before he killed someone. And he shows up every Sunday. He shows up to her school and is constantly texting and calling her. He constantly refers to her as his girlfriend, even though she's told him they're just friends. My sister is extremely shy and afraid of confrontation, which unfortunately makes her extremely vulnerable. Even so, I'm proud of her for standing up for herself so far. She just doesn't know what to do now. She avoids him as much as she can, but he's hell-bent on talking to her. And every time she goes long periods of time without seeing him, he tells her that he gets angry and wants to hurt something. He mentions sometimes kicking his dog. She's terrified to cut off contact with him, because she doesn't feel safe. He hasn't done anything illegal yet, or anything that's went against his probation, so a restraining order is probably out of the question. If this is the best subreddit for this, but I just heard about this, and this is definitely someone I don't want to meet. Except to kick his ass because I'm the heroic older brother. I'm a second-year university student, and I'm about to tell you how a Nando's date turned into a nightmare for me. So a little backstory. I matched with this girl on Hinge. Her name was Sophomore Convo Flowed, and she was responsive and in a positive way. No awkward pauses, just flowing into the early hours some nights. I picked up the courage and asked her for dinner. She agreed, and we settled on Nando's because, well, I'm a student and my budget doesn't exactly scream fancy wine bar. Plus, who doesn't love chicken? It felt like a safe choice. Oh, how wrong I was. The night started off well. I showed up on time, rare for me, and Sophie arrived looking amazing, like way out of my league amazing. I was already sweating bullets, just trying to act casual. We ordered our food, and the conversation was flowing. We were talking about uni, crappy landlords, funny TikToks. We even bonded over the mutual hell of group projects. But then, just as I was settling into this false sense of security, it happened. We were halfway through our peri-peri chicken when I saw her glance over my shoulder, and her whole face changed. Like 1 second she was laughing at my terrible joke about flatmates, and the next, she looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Before I could even ask what was wrong, I heard someone behind me shout, "So this is what you're doing, Sophie?" I froze. I turned around, and there he was, this guy who looked like a human embodiment of rage. He was tall, broad, and wearing a hoodie with the sleeves pushed up like he was trying to intimidate someone. Spoiler, it worked. Hi, I said because apparently my brain thought that was the appropriate response. Sophie, meanwhile, was already burying her face in her hands. "Who the hell is this guy?" the dude demanded, pointing at me like I'd personally wronged him. I looked at Sophie, silently begging for an explanation, but she just groaned and said, "Oh my God, Liam, what are you doing here?" Liam. Her ex. Of course. "I'm here because you've been ignoring my texts," he shouted, completely ignoring the fact that we were in a crowded restaurant and people were definitely starting to stare. "And now you're out here on a date? With this guy? Now listen, I'm not the type of guy to get into fights, especially not over someone I just met. But the way he said this guy made me feel like a piece of gum stuck to the bottom of his shoe. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make me sound cool and unbothered, but all I could manage was, "Dude, we're just having dinner. Just having dinner." I wanted to smack myself. I might as well have handed him a script that said, "Please continue yelling at me." Sophie finally stood up, clearly trying to de-escalate the situation. "Liam, you need to leave," she said firmly. "We broke up 2 months ago. You can't just show up like this." But Liam wasn't having it. "Broke up," he scoffed. "Is that what you're telling people now? You ghost me for weeks, and now you're pretending we're not together?" He turned to me again, his eyes narrowing. "Did she tell you that, mate? Did she tell you we're not together? Because I've got the receipts." At this point, I was wishing for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. People at other tables were straight up gawking, and I could hear a couple of teenagers snickering in the corner. I was that guy on that date, the one everyone talks about later like, "Yo, remember that awkward scene at Nando's last night?" Sophie looked like she was about to explode. "Liam, we're done. I don't owe you anything. Just leave." But Liam wasn't backing down. "Oh, so you're done," he shouted. "You're done, but you didn't think to tell me that before you started screwing around with other guys?" Classy, Sophie. Real classy. At this point, the manager came over, clearly trying to break up the scene before it escalated further. "Sir," he said to Liam, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing the other customers." Liam glared at the manager, then at me, then at Sophie. "This isn't over," he muttered, pointing a finger at her like we were in some low-budget soap opera. And then, finally, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was painful. Sophie sat back down, her face bright red, and I just stared at my plate, wondering if it was too late to fake a medical emergency. "I'm so sorry," she said after a minute. "He's not usually like this." I wanted to be polite. I wanted to say something like, "It's okay, these things happen." But the truth is, I was done. I was embarrassed, I was annoyed, and I was still trying to process how I'd gone from a fun date to being yelled at by a guy named Liam in the space of 20 minutes. So I did what any self-respecting student would do in that situation. I bailed. Yeah, I think I'm gonna head out," I said, grabbing my jacket. "This has been, yeah. I'll text you." Spoiler, I did not text her. I practically sprinted out of that Nando's, and as soon as I got home, I told my flatmates the whole story. They laughed so hard they were crying, which, honestly, fair. I'd probably laugh too if it hadn't happened to me. Moral of the story? If your date's ex shows up uninvited and starts shouting, just leave. Don't try to be the hero, don't try to smooth things over. Just grab your coat, your dignity, if you can find it, and run. Some things aren't worth the peri-peri. I always tell this as a cautionary tale that has actually happened to me, especially in light of all of the terrifying, heartbreaking news stories of girls who get into Ubers and are never seen again. This happened when I was in college. It's one of the bigger party schools, with an entire street of bars you can wander to and from. My boyfriend, now fiancé, had gone back to his hometown for the weekend, so I decided to go out with some friends. I'm sure you can see where this is going. I had a bit too much to drink and was on the edge of a blackout. Knowing with my whole mind, body and soul that I did not want to become a liability for my friends for the rest of the night, I told them I was going to Uber home. My friends insisted on coming home with me. But selfishly, I wanted to call my boyfriend when I got home and have a bed to myself, so I told them all no, but took a screenshot of my driver's name and info on the app and sent it to them. When he got close, I hugged them all and walked out the door. Like I said earlier, it's a big party school with lots of bars in one area, so the entire strip is lined with Ubers from about 11 p.m. to 3. It was almost bar close, so there were a ton, and look, I was hammered. I don't even know what a Toyota Yaris looks like at the best of times. So as I'm searching, a man rolled his window down and asked if I was waiting for an Uber. I said yes. He told me he wasn't my Uber, but if I canceled my ride and accepted his, then he would take me home. I was already thinking of the leftovers I had in my fridge at this point, so I agreed, canceled my Uber, and linked my account up with his. He was super nice, and he was an Uber. I've heard stories of fake Uber drivers, so I did make sure he was legit. He called me beautiful a few times right off the bat, but hey, I was a girl in college. I got that a lot. I remember we talked about our favorite books. I told him I was an English major, and he was super interested in listening to me talk about tutoring ESL students in my free time on campus. He was an immigrant who had to learn to speak English, so we lamented about how awful it is to learn such an intricate language, but how rewarding the successes were in the end. When he missed the turn-in for my apartment complex, I figured it must have been because he was distracted by our conversation. I politely pointed out that he missed the turn-in, and he said he'd turn back around. Rather than making a U-turn, though, he took the longest way to get back to my apartment. I was still in familiar territory, so I at least knew that he was going in the right direction, but I was starting to get nervous. It was around 2:30 at this time, and it was super dark and no one was awake, let alone outside. When he missed the turn-in again, I asked if I could just get out and make it back on my own. He seemed kind of offended, like he was surprised that I wasn't as engrossed in our conversation as he was. I kind of jokingly told him that I was a broke college student and he was racking up my bill during a surge. That seemed to straighten things out a bit. He was all, "Oh, I completely understand," and turned back toward my complex. I was honestly so freaked out and drunk at this point that as soon as he pulled into my complex, I was like, "Okay, right here is fine. Thank you," and pulled on the door handle when he came to a stop. It didn't open. I hit the little lock latch. Still nothing. "Let's go get coffee," he said. He clicked the button in the app to say the trip was completed and clicked out of the app. At this point, I'm just trying not to look as freaked out as I feel. I told him I was tired, and it was late, and coffee was the last thing I needed at the moment. I tried the door again, just to make sure I wasn't drunk and handling the door wrong. Still didn't open. "We should just sit here and talk until you're feeling better," he was explaining to me. "We can go somewhere more private, too, if you'd like. Do you live alone up there?" At this point, I'm frantically digging through my purse for my phone. Fuck being polite. When he asked what I was doing, I told him I promised my boyfriend I'd call him once I was home safely. Wrong thing to say. He got pissed that I had a boyfriend and didn't tell him about it. He asked what his name was, what he did for a living, and where he was right now at this very second. When I gave half-hearted answers, he got even angrier. He demanded to know why a boyfriend of mine would be stupid enough to leave his girl alone with another man, him. He repeated it twice. At this point, I'm trying not to cry. When I figured my phone must have fallen under the seat, I started digging around down there. He demanded to know what I was doing. I gave my best impression of a genuine laugh and said I dropped my phone. He told me to stop digging around in his things immediately. I stopped. Mind you, I'm still drunk as hell at this point. I was just trying to keep my shit together and not vomit or pass out. I tried the door a third time. Still nothing. He asked if I wanted to get coffee again. Even kind of begged a little. I told him no, I just needed sleep. He asked if I lived alone again. I lied and told him I had a roommate. He asked if it was my boyfriend, and I said no. A bunch of years ago, I matched with a guy on Tinder. I was a freshman in college, and just got out of a relationship and having fun. I matched with this guy, M24. We can call him D. He was a little odd, but we had similar interests and went to the same school, so I thought, why not? The red flags started rolling in immediately when I said I would go on a date with him. Of course, the fact that he was much older isn't lost on me as the initial red flag. At this time, I didn't have a car. D offers to pick me up, but tells me that he is not in town, but he would leave his grandmother's funeral early, which was at a minimum 5 hours away, to come and pick me up. He showed up in sweatpants, a wife beater, and flip-flops, which struck me as odd because he said he was coming from a funeral. We hadn't made plans, just to get a bite to eat and hang out. Since he had been out of town, he asked if it was okay if we stopped to pick up his dog. He had left the dog with a friend. I like dogs, so I was like, no problem. It's dark and we pull up to an apartment complex, and he leaves me in the car and come back with a golden retriever. The dog immediately starts growling at me, which had never happened to me before, so I start feeling a little weird. Dee doesn't say anything about the dog's temperament. Because we have the dog, he wants to drop him off at his house. This feels logical to me, so I agree. When we pull up to Dee's house, he asks if I want to come in. Not wanting to sit in the car, I do. The moment I walked in, I immediately knew it was the wrong choice. The house is trashed. There is garbage everywhere. Trash bags full along the front entry, bottles and wrappers on the couch, and just general crap everywhere. D lets me know he has a roommate, but that roommate isn't home. I assume this is to imply the mess isn't his. After brushing the trash off the couch, he asks if I want to sit and play chess. I had expressed that I was interested in learning, and he seemed more than happy to help me learn. This too was a mistake. D begins explaining the game to me, and it isn't fun first date explaining. He has gotten very serious and is showing me each piece while telling me what it is, what it does, and how it moves. D then begins questioning me over each piece, which most I get wrong. Every time I get one wrong, he yells at me the correct answer and tells me try again. He got more and more frustrated, and it made me very uncomfortable, so I suggested we pause chess and do something else. D suggests watching a movie, which is fine with me. The idea of us leaving and going to get food seemingly forgotten. D tells me that we can watch movie in his room, and I oblige, but then he explains that he has to put clean sheets on the bed. I had assumed we were moving to his bedroom because it may have been cleaner, but when we go in it's not, and there is no TV in his room. He proceeds to put Iron Man 2 onto his phone to have us watch. We watched about 10 minutes of it before things got sexual. I won't tell you strangers the details, but short story short, we didn't have sex, but other things went down. I will say those things were consensual. After they occurred, I was feel really odd about the whole situation and told him I didn't want to have sex. D was confused but didn't push it at first. He said fine, and we watched maybe 5 more minutes of the movie before he said he didn't want to watch the movie and more. He started complaining and asking me why I didn't want to have sex with him, and I simply said I wasn't in the mood anymore. He then began pressuring me to tell him exactly what it was about him that made me feel that way. At this point, we had moved from the bedroom back into the dirty living room. You might be thinking, seems like a perfect time to leave. And I thought so too, but this is where things start to get scary. As if he knows I'm thinking about how I'm leaving, he explodes and begins to scream at me. This is a 6-foot-something man screaming in the face of a 5-foot-nothing young girl. Of course I'm internally freaking out, but I'm trying to make sure I don't piss him off anymore, but also not agreeing to anything. For the next 5 to 10 minutes, D screams at me about why I don't like him, why I don't want him, and continuously asks what's wrong with him and to tell him. I tried to placate him as best as possible, saying the old, "It's not you, it's me," and no, I don't want to leave. Again, this man is my only ride home, and I'm truthfully not sure exactly where I was. Though I did have my phone and Google Maps, I did not have Uber at the time. D finally calms down when he believes I'm going to stay, then suggests we try playing some video game. I was in full internal freak-out mode, trying to make sure I was playing the part of the interested date, because I was terrified that if he felt I wanted to leave, he would freak out again. We play this game for a while, then, out of nowhere, D starts getting upset again. He started yelling about why no one likes him, why no one wants to get to know him, and why no one loves him, saying that he has never had a girlfriend, and all his dates have been one-night stands. Again, I placate him with a, "I don't know. Lots of girls are just snooty like that." At this point, I'm saying anything and everything he wants to hear. He even starts crying about how his mother never loved him, and telling me very deep, dark things about what his mother has said to him and treated him. After he finally calms down once more, he gets up and goes to the kitchen to fix us some drinks. Now, if you're anyone with a brain, you're thinking absolutely not, which was my exact thought at that moment. I decline his multiple offers for a drink. He asks if instead of alcohol, I wanted water, and of course I declined that too, feigning that I wasn't thirsty. I stayed at his apartment until about 1 a.m., because I was sitting next to him terrified to ask him to take me home 2, say I'd walk home 3, figure out how to get an Uber. I had been trying to download Uber on my phone without him noticing, but then it asks for card information, and that was too hard to do without him noticing. So around 1 a.m. I yawn very loud and say, "Oh wow, it's 1 a.m. My roommate's going to be so worried about me." I laugh as if my roommate would be stupid to worry, and that I hadn't been watching the clock since he picked me up at 9 p.m. then said, "I'm so tired. I should get home soon." Again, I was super scared he would freak out, but he didn't explode. He just looked at the clock and said yeah, it was late, but I was not taking any chances, so I said, "I have a great idea. If I get to bed, soon I'd love to have breakfast with you on campus." I was hoping my offer convinced him that I was intending to see him again, and it did. He seemed very happy at the prospect of it, and jumped up, walking me out of my house and to his car. The drive back was excruciatingly long. The ride was completely silent, neither of us spoke. It was only a 10-minute drive, but I could have sworn he slowed down every time we got to a particularly dark area or underpass. D dropped me off and I smiled and made a good show of being tired yet excited to see him tomorrow. He offered multiple times to walk me to my door, but I declined every time and said I didn't want to bother him and I'd see him tomorrow. I walked myself to the building, and the moment I got around the corner, I sprinted so fast up the stairs and to my door before he could change his mind and follow me to my door. When I got in my dorm room, I genuinely felt like I had just escaped a serial killer. Even now, writing it makes my heart race a bit. I never met up with him, but he begged me for multiple days after to meet up with him again. He ever asked to pay me $20 an hour to sit near me in the library. I declined, obviously, and only ever saw him once after at the gym on campus. He didn't see me, and I left immediately. I've thought about D occasionally since the date, and wondered if all those girls he had one-night stands with had the same experience I did. I still sometimes wonder how many girls there were after me.